I'm Molly, 33, and I never expected my life would turn into this story of betrayal and redemption. 10 years ago, I thought I had everything: a loving husband, a supportive sister, and dreams bigger than the sky. Then it all shattered in a single moment. Now I'm standing in front of a mansion at an auction holding a paddle that will change everything. Before I tell you how I got here, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button, because trust me, you'll want to see how karma works in mysterious ways. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, my childhood was comfortable but never extravagant. Our family valued hard work over material possessions, a principle that shaped who I became. My sister Jessica was 2 years older than me, and while we shared the typical sisterly bond, there was always an undercurrent of competition between us. Jessica was the beautiful one, the social butterfly who effortlessly drew attention wherever she went. I was more reserved, finding my voice through art and design rather than words. "You're so talented, Molly," my mother would say whenever she saw my drawings. "Jessica may have her charm, but you have vision." Those words became my anchor through the years of living in my sister's shadow. Jessica wasn't deliberately cruel, she had a habit of wanting whatever I had, whether it was a new sweater or a friend who showed me special attention. College was my escape, a fresh start where nobody knew me as Jessica's little sister. It was during my sophomore year at Oregon State, in a crowded coffee shop on campus, that I quite literally bumped into Brian. Tall, with captivating blue eyes and an easy smile, he caught my spilling coffee with reflexes that hinted at his athletic past. "I think you just created a new abstract art piece on my economics textbook," he joked, not a trace of annoyance in his voice. What started as an apology coffee turned into dinner, which evolved into the most intense connection I'd ever felt with another person. Brian was studying business with dreams of breaking into real estate development. He had this magnetic confidence about him, a certainty that his future would be extraordinary. "I'm going to build communities that change how people live," he'd tell me, eyes alight with passion. "And I want you beside me every step of the way." By our senior year, we were inseparable. Brian proposed on graduation day, getting down on one knee in front of our families and friends. I remember Jessica's expression as she watched him slide the modest diamond onto my finger. A mixture of happiness and something else I couldn't quite identify at the time. Our wedding day came 18 months later. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect to me. Jessica served as my maid of honor, helping me into my dress and calming my nerves before the ceremony. "He's a good catch," she whispered as we waited for the music to cue my entrance. "You're so lucky, Molly." The first 5 years of our marriage were beautiful in their simplicity. We moved into a small craftsman-style home in a developing neighborhood. While Brian worked his way up at a local real estate firm, I built my freelance graphic design business from our spare bedroom. My career often took a back seat to his ambitions, but I didn't mind. I believed in him, in us, in the future we were building together. "Once I make partner, we'll start trying for a baby," Brian would say, kissing my forehead. "We'll build our dream home with a nursery overlooking the garden." Those promises sustained me through the lonely nights when he worked late through the weekends, consumed by his networking events. I didn't see the warning signs: the way his eyes would linger on Jessica when she visited, how she began dropping by his office to have lunch with her brother-in-law, the increasing frequency of his mentions of her in our conversations. "Jessica says the East Side is developing faster than anyone anticipated," he'd comment over dinner. Or Jessica had some interesting insights about the Henderson property. When had my sister become such an expert on real estate? And when had Brian started valuing her opinion so highly? These questions flickered briefly in my mind, but were quickly dismissed. After all, they were family now. Their growing closeness seemed natural, even positive. How blind I was, mistaking the first tremors for stability. As our 5th anniversary approached, I began planning a surprise weekend getaway to rekindle the romance that had gradually dimmed as Brian's career intensified. Little did I know that our marriage was already far more damaged than I could have imagined, and that the people I trusted most were the architects of its destruction. The changes were subtle at first, like a slow-moving current beneath a calm surface. Brian began guarding his phone, tilting the screen away whenever I entered the room. The late nights at the office stretched longer, and his explanations grew increasingly vague. When I reached for him in bed, he was often too tired or preoccupied with work concerns. "You're imagining things," he assured me when I finally voiced my worries. "The Westlake project is at a critical stage. Once it's completed, everything will go back to normal." I wanted to believe him. After 6 years of marriage, trust was fundamental to our relationship. Yet something felt off, a persistent discomfort I couldn't shake. Jessica's behavior shifted too. My once-monthly lunch dates with my sister suddenly increased in frequency. She seemed intensely curious about my marriage, asking questions that felt strangely invasive. "Are you and Brian still intimate?" she asked over salads one Wednesday. When I blushed, she added, "It's important for sisters to talk about these things. I worry about you." Her concern seemed genuine, but something in her expression didn't quite match her words. When she offered to help by speaking to Brian about his distant behavior, alarm bells rang faintly in the back of my mind. "That's not necessary," I told her firmly. "We'll work it out ourselves." The family dinner at our parents' house that weekend marked a turning point in my awareness. As we gathered around the dining table, I noticed glances exchanged between Brian and Jessica, fleeting but charged with unspoken communication. When his hand brushed hers while passing the bread basket, neither of them acknowledged it, but I saw her cheeks flush pink. My mother noticed my silence on the drive home. "Is everything all right with you and Brian?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Everything's fine." I lied, the words bitter on my tongue. Brian's business trips grew more frequent the following month. Chicago, Phoenix, Seattle, cities where his company had no ongoing projects. When I pointed this out, his explanation came too quickly. "We're exploring new markets," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's all very preliminary." It was during one of these trips that I found the receipt while doing laundry, a women's bracelet from a high-end jeweler in Seattle purchased on a day Brian claimed to be in meetings from dawn till dusk. The price made me gasp, $3,000 more than we typically spent on each other for birthdays and anniversaries combined. When confronted, Brian dismissed it as a gift for his mother's upcoming birthday. "I wanted to surprise everyone," he said, taking the receipt from my trembling hands. "You've ruined the surprise now." But his mother's birthday was 8 months away, and she preferred simple jewelry, nothing ostentatious. The lie hung between us, the first openly acknowledged deception in our marriage. More discoveries followed. Mysterious charges at upscale restaurants on nights he claimed to be working late. A hotel booking in Portland when he was supposedly in Denver. The growing coldness in his eyes when he looked at me. Then came the criticisms, subtle at first, then increasingly blatant. "That outfit doesn't flatter you," he commented one morning. "And have you thought about refreshing your hairstyle? It's looking a bit dated." Comments about my career choices followed. "Freelance design isn't very stable. Maybe you should consider something with more growth potential." Each criticism chipped away at my self-confidence, leaving me increasingly anxious and insecure. Was I no longer attractive to him? Had my career choices disappointed him? I found myself scrutinizing my appearance in the mirror, wondering what had changed to make him so dissatisfied. One evening while Brian was showering, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name that flashed on the screen froze my blood, Jess, with a heart emoji beside it. Without thinking, I answered. "Brian?" Jessica's voice came through, intimate and warm. "I miss you. The meeting ran long, but I'm heading to the hotel now. Will I see you later?" I ended the call without speaking, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Minutes later, Jessica called my phone, her voice artificially bright as she asked about a pair of earrings she thought she'd left at our house. The performance was flawless, but I knew. In that moment I knew. Yet knowing and proving were different matters entirely. I needed evidence beyond a suspicious phone call and circumstantial oddities. I needed truth, however painful it might be. For weeks, I lived in limbo, searching for conclusive proof while hoping desperately to be wrong. Every fiber of my being wanted this to be a horrible misunderstanding, a paranoid fantasy conjured by insecurity. But as winter turned to spring, the distance between Brian and me grew into an unbridgeable chasm. The man who once couldn't spend a day without calling just to hear my voice now barely acknowledged my presence in our home. And Jessica, my sister and oldest friend, began making excuses to avoid our one-on-one gatherings, always too busy or tired whenever I suggested meeting. The foundation of my life was cracking beneath my feet, and I was the only one who seemed to notice or care. I was drowning in suspicion and doubt, desperately grasping for any explanation other than the obvious betrayal staring me in the face. After weeks of living with gnawing suspicion, I decided to surprise Brian at his office. It was our anniversary, and despite the growing distance between us, I clung to the hope that a romantic gesture might rekindle what we had lost. I dressed carefully, wore the perfume he once said drove him wild, and carried a picnic basket with all his favorites. The receptionist's face when I arrived spoke volumes before she uttered a word. "Mr. Lambert isn't in today," she said, avoiding my eyes. "He called off all his appointments this morning." "There must be some mistake," I insisted. "He left home at 7 for an important client meeting here." Her uncomfortable silence confirmed what my heart already knew. Before leaving, I asked one final question. "Was my sister Jessica here earlier?" The flicker of recognition in her eyes was answer enough. With nowhere else to go, I drove home in a daze, the untouched picnic food, a cruel reminder of my naivety. Our house felt suffocatingly quiet as I wandered from room to room, trying to make sense of a world that was rapidly unraveling around me. In our home office, Brian's laptop sat charging, unusual for him to leave behind on a workday. Some desperate instinct compelled me to open it. To my surprise, it wasn't password protected. Perhaps he'd grown careless, or perhaps he simply didn't care enough to hide anymore. The text messages appeared immediately on the screen, an ongoing conversation with Jessica that spanned months. Photographs, plans, declarations of love, hotel confirmations, flight itineraries. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. "We need to be more careful," Jessica had written just 2 days earlier. Molly asked about the Seattle trip. "She suspects nothing," Brian replied. "But I agree we should move our timeline forward." I read every message, each word a dagger to my heart. They discussed me as an inconvenience, an obstacle to their happiness. They critiqued my appearance, mocked my trust, planned their future, while systematically destroying mine. When Brian returned home that evening, I was sitting in the dark living room, his laptop open beside me. One look at my face told him everything. "So now you know," he said, his voice devoid of remorse or shame. "How could you—" The question felt pathetically inadequate for the magnitude of his betrayal. "She's my sister." "We didn't plan for this to happen, Molly." He sat across from me, maintaining a physical distance that mirrored the emotional gulf between us. "These things just develop sometimes." "How long?" My voice was barely audible. "A little over a year." A year? While I had been planning anniversary surprises and dreaming of starting a family, they had been building a relationship behind my back. Every late night, every business trip, every time he had touched me while possibly thinking of her, the realizations came in sickening waves. "I want a divorce," Brian continued, as if announcing a change in dinner plans. "I've already spoken with my attorney. You'll be receiving papers next week." "You've already—" The room seemed to tilt around me. "You've already prepared divorce papers. It's better this way, cleaner. Jessica and I—" He paused, perhaps finally registering the cruelty of his words. "We want to start fresh." "In our house?" I asked suddenly, imagining them living in the home we had built together. "Actually, we're moving to Arizona next month. I've been offered a position with a development company in Phoenix." The pieces clicked into terrible place. The mysterious trips, the discussions about new markets. They had been planning this escape for months, constructing their new life while systematically dismantling mine. When Jessica finally called, her attempts at explanation were equally hollow. "We fought it for so long, Molly. She said, her voice breaking in what seemed like practiced remorse. "You have to believe we never wanted to hurt you." "But you did hurt me," I whispered. "Both of you. In the worst way possible. I know it seems unforgivable now, but someday you'll understand that some connections are just inevitable." Her words revealed a narcissism so profound, it left me speechless. In her mind, their connection justified any pain they caused, any trust they betrayed. The next weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations and devastating discoveries. Brian had been financially preparing for this moment, moving assets beyond my reach, establishing separate accounts, ensuring I would walk away with as little as possible. The house I had helped choose, the life I had helped build, the future I had believed in, all of it was being systematically stripped away. Friends I had thought were mine revealed their true allegiances. "These things happen," one said. "Marriage is complicated." Another suggested that perhaps I had been too focused on my career, too inattentive to Brian's needs. The victim blaming was subtle but unmistakable. Most painful was my parents' reaction. While clearly devastated by Jessica's actions, they struggled with taking sides between their daughters. "Family is family," my father said uncomfortably. "We need to find a way through this together." But there was no together anymore. The family I had known was irreparably fractured. The sister I had grown up with shared secrets with, trusted implicitly. She was now a stranger wearing a familiar face. And the man I had built my adult life around had revealed himself to be someone I never truly knew at all. As the divorce proceedings accelerated, I felt myself vanishing. The Molly who had existed before this betrayal, trusting, optimistic, secure in her place in the world, was dying by inches. In her place was emerging someone hollow and unfamiliar, a woman defined by the wounds inflicted upon her by the people she had loved most. The divorce was finalized with brutal efficiency, largely due to my lack of resistance. Fighting would have meant prolonging contact with Brian, extending the pain when all I wanted was escape. I signed away rights to assets I likely deserved, agreed to terms that heavily favored him, and walked away with a settlement that barely covered 6 months of living expenses. Our house, the one we had lovingly furnished over 6 years of marriage, had to be sold quickly. The real estate market was in a downswing, ensuring we sold at a loss. After the mortgage was settled, my share wasn't enough for a down payment on even the smallest condo in Portland. I found a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I wouldn't have considered in my previous life. The building was run down, the neighbors loud, the street unsafe after dark. But it was all I could afford while trying to rebuild my freelance business, which had suffered during the emotional maelstrom of the divorce. Financial hardship was only one dimension of my loss. The social fallout was equally devastating. Mutual friends chose sides, and most chose Brian's. His charisma and success drew people like moths to flame, while my grief was uncomfortable, a reminder of unpleasant realities people preferred to ignore. "We still love you, Molly," one former friend said when declining my dinner invitation. "But Brian and Jessica are hosting a housewarming the same night. You understand, right?" I didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend how people who had attended our wedding could so easily accept their relationship, how the profound betrayal at its foundation could be so quickly overlooked. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, Jessica and Brian were married in a lavish ceremony at a vineyard outside Portland. I learned about it through social media posts. I shouldn't have been looking at torturing myself with images of their perfect day. Jessica wore a designer gown that cost more than my annual rent. Brian beamed beside her, no trace of guilt in his expression. Their wedding gift to themselves was a mansion in Dunthorpe, the most exclusive neighborhood in Portland. 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a pool with a view of the Willamette River. The purchase made the local business news. Brian's success story of transforming a regional real estate company through innovative development strategies celebrated without a single mention of the personal lives destroyed in its wake. Meanwhile, I was taking on graphic design projects I would have declined in my previous life. Boring corporate work that paid the bills but crushed my creative spirit. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes through weekends, trying to rebuild a client base while competing with younger designers with fresher portfolios and lower rates. Depression settled over me like a heavy cloak. I stopped calling friends back, ignored my parents' increasingly worried messages, lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. Sleep became either impossible or an escape I indulged in for 12-14 hours at a stretch. The lowest moment came 9 months after the divorce. I had developed a persistent cough that I ignored for weeks, attributing it to stress and poor ventilation in my apartment. When I finally collapsed at my desk, a neighbor heard my fall and called an ambulance. The diagnosis: pneumonia exacerbated by exhaustion and malnutrition. "Your body is shutting down," the doctor told me bluntly. "You're not taking care of yourself, and it's becoming dangerous." Lying in the hospital bed with no one listed as my emergency contact, I faced the stark reality of what my life had become. I had allowed Brian and Jessica's betrayal to define me, to determine not just my past, but my future. I was existing rather than living, punishing myself for crimes others had committed against me. The hospital social worker who visited me asked a question that shifted something fundamental inside me. What would you be doing with your life if this betrayal had never happened? The answer came immediately. I'd be building my own design firm, creating brands that tell authentic stories, making something that's entirely mine. "And what's stopping you from doing that now?" she pressed. I had no good answer. Nothing was stopping me except the belief that I had been permanently diminished by what had happened to me, that my worth had somehow been reduced by others' actions. That night in the hospital, staring at the ceiling as IV antibiotics flowed into my arm, I made a decision. I would rebuild my life, not the one I had lost, but something new and entirely mine. I would stop defining myself as Brian's ex-wife or Jessica's betrayed sister. I would become someone they wouldn't recognize, someone who had transcended the narrative they had written for me. It wouldn't be quick, and it certainly wouldn't be easy. But lying in that hospital bed, weaker physically than I had ever been, I felt the first stirring of a strength I hadn't known I possessed. This was rock bottom, and the only direction left was up. The rebuilding process began with small, deliberate steps. After being discharged from the hospital, I made 2 immediate changes. I sought therapy to address the trauma of betrayal, and I enrolled in night classes to earn a business certificate. Knowledge would be my foundation. Understanding myself and understanding business would provide the structure for everything that followed. My therapist, Dr. Reyes, helped me recognize patterns of self-sabotage that had developed since the divorce. "You're punishing yourself for their actions," she observed during one session. "Every time you take on a project you hate, work yourself to exhaustion, or isolate from potential connection, you're reinforcing the narrative that you deserved what happened." Her words stung because they were true. Somewhere deep inside, I had internalized the idea that Brian and Jessica's betrayal reflected some fundamental flaw in me. Breaking that pattern meant confronting the shame that had no logical basis, but had nonetheless become my constant companion. The business classes introduced me to Sarah Markham, a former marketing executive who had built her own consulting firm after being passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified male colleagues. Something about my situation resonated with her, and she took an interest in my development. "You have a unique perspective," she told me after reviewing my portfolio. "There's authentic emotion in your design work, a depth that technical skill alone can't create. You've experienced profound loss and betrayal, and while I would never wish that on anyone, it gives your creative vision something special." Sarah became my mentor, guiding me through the process of repositioning my freelance work into a proper business structure. Under her guidance, I developed a business plan focused on authentic brand storytelling for small to mid-sized companies, helping businesses communicate their values through visual identity. "Find clients who align with your values," she advised. "Build relationships, not just transactions. Your empathy is your superpower in this industry." My first major client came through Sarah's network, a family-owned organic skincare company struggling to compete with corporate giants. Their products were exceptional, at their branding generic, failing to communicate the passion and principles behind their business. I immersed myself in their story, learning about the grandmother's recipes that had inspired the product line, the the sustainable harvesting practices, the community of farmers they supported. The rebranding campaign I developed centered on these authentic human connections, using visual storytelling to invite customers into their world rather than simply selling products. When the campaign launched, their sales increased by 40% within 3 months. The success attracted attention from similar businesses seeking authentic branding that resonated emotionally with consumers. For the first time since the divorce, I felt a sense of purpose and direction. Over the next 2 years, my client list grew steadily. I moved from my depressing apartment to a modest but bright condo in a safer neighborhood. I hired my first employee, Marcus, a talented young designer whose technical skills complemented my strategic vision. Together, we took on larger projects, gradually building a reputation for transformative branding work. By the 5th year after my divorce, Authentic Narratives Design had grown to a team of 6 working from a small but stylish office in downtown Portland. We specialized in helping businesses in transition, companies at inflection points needing to reconnect with their core values and communicate them effectively to the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own personal inflection point, that devastating betrayal, had ultimately led me to find my professional purpose. The empathy I had developed through suffering became a cornerstone of my business approach, allowing me to connect with clients at a deeper level than competitors who viewed branding as merely a technical exercise. Throughout this period of professional growth, I deliberately avoided news about Brian and Jessica. Portland's business community was small enough that occasional information filtered through despite my best efforts. I knew their development company had expanded rapidly, taking on increasingly ambitious projects. Their social media presence, which I had blocked, but friends sometimes mentioned, showed a life of calculated perfection, exotic vacations, charity galas, the performance of success. 7 years after our divorce, I received an unexpected email from my former neighbor in the Craftsman house Brian and I had shared. We had stayed loosely in touch, exchanging holiday cards and occasional messages. Her email was brief but impactful. Thought you should know, Brian's company is mentioned in a local business article about overextended real estate developers. Apparently, they've been leveraging properties aggressively and the market is turning. Nothing definitive but interesting given how they've been living. Hope you're well. I didn't respond immediately. My first reaction was a complicated mix of emotions: vindication, concern, curiosity. But I realized with some surprise that whatever happened with Brian's business didn't actually matter to my life anymore. I had built something valuable and meaningful that existed entirely independent of him. My success wasn't contingent on his failure. That realization marked another milestone in my healing journey. I had moved beyond merely surviving the betrayal to truly living again, focused forward rather than backward. The woman who had once defined herself by her marriage, and then by its dissolution, had evolved into someone new, someone stronger, more authentic, and ultimately more fulfilled than she might have been had the betrayal never occurred. As Authentic Narratives continued to grow, expanding into national markets and earning industry recognition, I occasionally reflected on the strange path that had led me here. The greatest pain of my life had ultimately catalyzed my greatest growth. This wasn't a perspective I would have been capable of in those early raw days of betrayal, but time and purposeful rebuilding had granted me an unexpected gift: the ability to integrate that pain into a larger, richer life story. 10 years after my divorce, Authentic Narratives had become one of the most respected boutique branding agencies in the Pacific Northwest. We had opened a second office in Seattle, expanded to a team of 22 creative professionals, and were regularly invited to pitch for national accounts. The girl who had once believed her greatest achievement would be supporting her husband's ambitions had built something remarkable entirely on her own terms. A call from a potential new client brought an unexpected twist of fate. West Coast Natural Foods, a regional organic grocery chain, was planning a major rebranding to support their expansion. The marketing director requested a meeting in Portland, explaining that they were interviewing several agencies but had heard impressive things about our work in authentic brand storytelling. The meeting was scheduled at their headquarters, which happened to be located just 3 blocks from the mansion Brian and Jessica had purchased after their wedding. I hadn't driven through that neighborhood in years, deliberately avoiding the painful memories it might trigger. As I prepared my presentation focusing on our process and portfolio, I felt none of the anxiety such a coincidence might have caused in earlier years. I was a different person now, confident in my professional identity, secure in my worth, no longer defined by past betrayals. The presentation went exceptionally well. West Coast's executive team responded enthusiastically to our vision for their brand evolution, particularly our emphasis on community connection and transparent sourcing. As we concluded, their CEO mentioned casually, "We're considering acquiring a property in Dunthorpe for our new flagship location with expanded community spaces. There's a mansion going into foreclosure that might be adaptable for our purposes. Are you familiar with the neighborhood?" The synchronicity was almost too perfect to be coincidental. A quick search on my phone during the lunch break confirmed my suspicion. The property in question was indeed Brian and Jessica's mansion. Further research revealed a trail of financial missteps that had led to this moment. Brian's company had overextended during the real estate boom, leveraging properties against each other in increasingly risky configurations. When the market cooled, their cash flow collapsed. Recent public records showed tax liens, multiple mortgages, and finally foreclosure proceedings. The auction was scheduled for the following month. The listing included photos of the mansion, the sweeping staircase, the marble-clad kitchen, the pool with its perfect view of the river. Spaces designed for a life of luxury that had apparently been built on an unstable foundation. I faced an ethical dilemma. Using this information to secure the West Coast account by suggesting we could help brand their flagship location in the foreclosed property felt manipulative and potentially unprofessional. Yet the possibility of being involved in transforming that space, a symbol of what had once broken me, held undeniable appeal. After careful consideration, I decided transparency was the only appropriate approach. I scheduled a follow-up meeting with West Coast's marketing director and explained my personal connection to the property they were considering. "I believe I can bring unique insight to this project precisely because of this history," I explained. "But I wanted you to have all the information before making your decision about our agency." Rather than being deterred, the director was intrigued. "That kind of authentic personal narrative aligns perfectly with what attracted us to your agency in the first place," she said. "If you're comfortable with it, we'd like to proceed with you as our partner in this rebranding." With the West Coast project secured, I found myself drawn to the upcoming auction. Initially, I told myself I was simply gathering information that might be useful for the rebranding project. But as the date approached, I acknowledged a deeper truth. I wanted to witness this moment of karmic balance, this tangible evidence that the betrayal that had once shattered my world had not in fact led to the happily ever after Brian and Jessica had envisioned. The day of the auction dawned bright and clear. I dressed with particular care, not in celebration of others' misfortune, but in acknowledgement of my own journey. The auction was held in a downtown hotel conference room, sparsely attended given the property's high starting bid despite its distressed status. I registered as a bidder without any real intention of participating. My purpose was observation, not acquisition. But as I sat in the back row, paddle number 37 in my lap, a wild idea began to form. What if I could purchase this property? Not for personal use. I had no desire to live in a space so connected to painful memories, but as the new headquarters for authentic narratives. The numbers worked surprisingly. My business had been consistently profitable for years with significant reserves built up for eventual expansion. The foreclosure meant the property would likely sell well below market value. The mansion's layout could be adapted for office space, with the grounds serving as a creative campus for our growing team. When the bidding began, I watched silently as several developers made initial offers. The price climbed steadily but remained within the realm of possibility for my company's resources. When the bidding seemed to plateau, I raised my paddle. "Number 37 new bidder at $1.2 million, the auctioneer announced. A flutter of turning heads and whispers followed. I maintained my composure, focusing on the financial and practical aspects of this potential investment, rather than its emotional significance. Two more bidders continued competing, pushing the price higher in smaller increments. 1.4 million from number 37, the auctioneer called as I raised my paddle again. One competitor dropped out. The remaining bidder, a developer I recognized from industry events, gave me a calculating look before making a final bid. I countered immediately. 1.5 million from number 37, going once, going twice. The gavel fell with a sound that seemed to reverberate through my entire being. I had purchased the mansion that symbolized everything I had lost, and everything I had subsequently gained through that loss. As I completed the paperwork, a familiar voice behind me froze me mid-signature. "Molly, is that you?" Jessica stood a few feet away. Her designer clothes less pristine than I remembered her expression, a complex mixture of shock and embarrassment. Brian was noticeably absent. "Hello, Jessica." I said, my voice steady and neutral. Neither warm nor cold. The voice of someone acknowledging a person from their distant past. You bought our house?" Disbelief colored her question. "I bought a property that will become the new headquarters for my design agency," I corrected gently. "Authentic Narratives Design. We've outgrown our current location." "I don't understand. How can you afford—" She trailed off, perhaps realizing the rudeness of the question. "Life takes unexpected turns," I said simply. "My company has been quite successful." 1,000 emotions seemed to cross her face in that moment. Regret, perhaps, or the dawning realization of how profoundly she had underestimated me. She looked as though she wanted to say more, but ultimately just nodded and walked away. Shoulders slightly hunched under the weight of consequences, finally catching up to choices made long ago. As I watched her go, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The triumph of this moment wasn't about revenge or vindication, but about the full-circle journey from devastation to creation. The property that had once represented everything I had lost would now become the foundation for everything I had built. The transformation of the mansion into Authentic Narratives headquarters became a living metaphor for my personal journey. Each space was reimagined with purpose and meaning, honoring its architectural integrity while infusing it with new energy and direction. The formal dining room where Brian and Jessica had likely hosted lavish dinner parties became our main conference space, a place for collaborative creativity rather than superficial socializing. The master suite was converted into a wellness area for our team with meditation spaces and quiet work pods. The pool house became a photography and video studio, capturing authentic brand stories in controlled natural light. Most symbolically, I converted the grand entryway, with its sweeping staircase designed to impress visitors with the owner's wealth and status, into a gallery showcasing our clients' journeys. The walls displayed before and after examples of the brands we had helped transform, each with a brief story of the challenges overcome and authentic values revealed through our work. The renovation process wasn't without challenges. As walls were opened, we discovered shortcuts taken during previous renovations, cosmetic fixes concealing structural issues, much like the marriage that had once inhabited this space. Each problem required patience and proper attention, refusing quick solutions that would only postpone inevitable failures. 6 months after the auction, as we prepared for the official opening of our new headquarters, I received an unexpected email from Brian. It was brief and uncharacteristically humble. "Molly, I heard about what you've done with the house. It seems fitting somehow. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I wanted to acknowledge your success. It appears you found your way forward much more successfully than I found mine." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't either diminish my journey or offer false comfort for his failures. Some chapters are best closed without further dialogue. During this period of professional transformation, my personal life had also evolved in unexpected ways. 2 years earlier, I had met Daniel at a business conference where we were both speaking. He on sustainable business practices, me on authentic brand communication. Our connection was immediate, but developed slowly, built on mutual respect and careful trust. Daniel knew my history. I had shared it early in our relationship, wanting complete transparency about the experiences that had shaped me. Unlike others who had responded with pity or discomfort, he simply acknowledged the strength it had taken to rebuild after such betrayal. "We're all composites of our experiences," he said. "The painful ones often forge the strongest elements of our character." On the evening before our headquarters grand opening, Daniel and I walked through the transformed spaces, making final preparations for the event that would introduce clients and industry colleagues to our new home. "Does it feel strange?" he asked as we stood in the garden that had once been designed for someone else's life. Being here owning this place, I considered the question carefully. Not strange exactly, more like completing a circle. This house once represented everything I lost. Now it represents everything I've built. The opening celebration the next day brought together clients, employees, friends, and family in a space that had been thoroughly reclaimed and redefined. My parents attended visibly proud of what I had created, though still navigating the complicated reality of having two daughters who remained estranged from each other. As guests explored the transformed mansion, admiring the thoughtful renovation and the showcase of our agency's work, I overheard many conversations about the perfect alignment between our brand philosophy and our headquarters, how a structure once defined by surface appearances had been reimagined to reveal authentic purpose and value. The most unexpected moment came near the end of the evening. As the crowd thinned, I noticed a woman standing alone in the gallery hallway studying the client journey displays with unusual intensity. It took me a moment to recognize Jessica. She had aged visibly in the months since the auction, stress evident in the lines around her eyes and mouth. I approached her calmly, neither seeking nor avoiding this encounter. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said. Jessica turned a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face. "I wasn't on the guest list. I hope you don't mind that I came." "Why did you—" The question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. She gestured vaguely at the transformed space around us. "I needed to see it, I think. To understand." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of 15 years hanging between us. "Brian and I divorced 6 months ago," she finally said. "He's moved to Chicago to restart with what's left of his business." I nodded, unsurprised. Their relationship had been built on shifting sand. The same capacity for betrayal that had brought them together would inevitably undermine their foundation. "I'm sorry for what we did to you," Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because it didn't work out for us in the end, but because it was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. I've spent years trying to justify it, but there's no justification." Her apology. 15 years delayed couldn't undo the past, but it acknowledged a truth that had long been denied. I didn't respond with immediate forgiveness or rejection, instead offering something more honest. "Thank you for saying that. I built a good life despite what happened, maybe even because of it in some ways." "You did more than build a good life," she said, looking around at the evidence of my success. "You created something meaningful." We didn't embrace or make plans to reconnect. Some bridges once burned cannot be fully rebuilt. But as she left, something long knotted within me gently loosened. The final thread connecting me to that old pain seemed to release, allowing me to fully inhabit the person I had become, rather than the one who had been betrayed. In the quiet aftermath of the celebration, I stood alone in what had once been the mansion's grand living room, now our creative studio. The space hummed with potential energy, ready for the work that would unfold within its walls. The painful past hadn't disappeared. It had been incorporated, transformed, given new meaning through purposeful intention. The wealth I had found wasn't measured in square footage or bank balances, though both were now substantial. The true richness lay in the journey itself, in the discovery that devastation could lead to creation, that betrayal could open doors to deeper authenticity, that what seemed like an ending could become the most important beginning. As I prepared to leave that night, I paused in the entryway gallery where our client journeys were displayed. Soon we would add another, the story of authentic narratives itself, with this headquarters as physical testimony to the power of reclaiming your own story, of building something genuine from the ruins of what was lost. I've learned that true wealth isn't found in mansions or marriages, in possessions or status. It's found in the courage to begin again, in the wisdom gained through suffering, in the authentic connections formed when we bring our whole imperfect selves to each new day. It's found in recognizing that our greatest strength often emerges from our most painful moments if we're brave enough to keep moving forward. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a devastating loss? How did you find the strength to start again? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their story isn't over yet. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with the most painful endings. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find authentic strength in whatever challenges you're facing today.